Have you ever felt completely shattered after a criticism? As if a single word was enough to dismantle you from the inside, to corrode your confidence and make you question whether you really have any worth? Have you ever felt that someone's rejection, even if small, confirms your worst fears about yourself? That the other person's silence is deafening because it echoes in your head like an accusation? If you live in this state of constant emotional vulnerability, perhaps you have been taught to believe that the problem is being too sensitive. Or maybe you have internalized that you need to toughen up or stop caring about what others think. But what if I told you that the problem is not sensitivity? That the problem, in fact, is structure? Carl Gustav Jung called this a permeable ego, a psychic condition where there are no clear boundaries between your internal world and the external world. Every criticism pierces you like an arrow. Every rejection directly punctures your core. Every other person's opinion drags you away from yourself. And the worst part, you start to think that this suffering is your fault, as if there is something wrong with feeling so much. But that's not what Jung saw. He didn't see weakness, he saw interrupted development. The harsh truth is that many of us grew up without ever building a psychological armor, not because we are weak, but because no one taught us how. Perhaps you grew up in an environment where love was conditional, where you had to behave a certain way to be accepted. Perhaps your emotions were ignored, ridiculed, or invalidated. Maybe every mistake was treated as proof that you were not enough. And over time, you learned to measure yourself by the gaze of others. This is not just your story. It is the pattern of thousands, perhaps millions, of people walking through the world without a solid identity, living as mirrors of others' judgments. And that is dangerous, because without internal structure, you become a slave to external reactions. Jung said that the ego is not something that is born ready. It needs to be formed, strengthened, differentiated. A healthy ego is like armor, not to make you cold or inaccessible, but so that you can exist in the world without shattering at every opposing wind. In this video, we will build that armor together. We will understand, step by step, how to create the psychological boundaries you never had, how to develop a self so solid that no criticism can erase you. And in the end, you will not be a person shielded by rigidity, but someone with enough courage to be vulnerable without being destroyed by it. Get ready. This will not be a light conversation. But if you are tired of living at the mercy of the world, it's time to take control back. You were not born with a fragile ego. This is important to understand right from the start. No one comes into the world carrying the certainty that they are worthless, or believing that they need to be perfect to be loved. This is learned. And what is learned can, with effort, with awareness, be unlearned. Carl Jung observed, in his clinical practice and in his deep investigation of psychic development, that many adults living in chronic emotional suffering are not weak, but rather unfinished, incomplete at the exact point where they should have been structured. And that is where the key lies. The fragile ego is not a characteristic, it is a consequence. A symptom of a prematurely interrupted individuation process. Imagine a child growing up in a home where love is a reward and not a foundation, where every gesture needs to be approved to be accepted, where making a mistake is dangerous, where showing sadness is seen as drama, where anger is punished. Now imagine that same child trying to form their own identity. How will they know who they are if every authentic aspect of themselves has been silenced? How will they trust their own emotions if every time they felt something true, they were corrected, ridiculed, or punished? They learn too early that their internal truth has no value. And because of this, they begin to shape their being to fit the expectations of others. And with each small concession, each forced smile, each swallowed opinion to avoid rejection, their ego disintegrates a little more. By the time they reach adulthood, this person lives in deep emptiness. They may even be successful, admired, have relationships. But inside, all of this feels like theater, like a performance. Because the stage is external, and the true self never had space to truly exist. And the worst part, without internal references, any criticism is an earthquake. Any rejection is a death sentence. Any silence is interpreted as abandonment. According to Jung, this type of ego is not capable of sustaining tension, nor of dealing with ambiguity. It collapses because it was not made to endure. It was made to please, to survive, to adapt to an unpredictable world where being authentic was dangerous. And here is the truth that no one tells you. This suffering you carry, this overwhelming sensitivity, is not a defect. It is a psychological scream from a structure that was never solidified. And what you need is not strength in the common sense. What you need is reconstruction. But be careful. Throughout this reconstruction, you will realize that many of the defenses you use today, isolation, perfectionism, arrogance, aggression, are not strength. They are desperate protection mechanisms of an ego that is still trying to shield itself from the original pain. And that is exactly what we will talk about in the next part. Because perhaps what you think is your armor today is actually keeping you weak. We will expose these false defenses and understand why they do not work. Are you ready? If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. If you have ever noticed that you are extremely sensitive to criticism, rejection, or the opinions of others, you may have also developed certain defenses to cope with it. And here is the crucial point. These defenses are not the true armor you need. They are disguises, broken shields, rigid cocoons that prevent you from growing, but do not stop you from bleeding. Carl Jung was emphatic in pointing out that the fragile ego, the one that has not yet gone through the process of individuation, often hides behind defensive masks that seem like strength, but are crystallized fear. They are survival strategies, not strategies of psychic maturity. Let's start with defensive arrogance. It appears as an inflated, almost theatrical posture, where the person does everything to seem impenetrable. They become hyper-rational, cynical, mocking, but just one offhand comment is enough to reveal what lies beneath: an absolute fear of appearing inferior. Arrogance in this case is not confidence. It is a fragile armor built to hide the emptiness of an ego that feels constantly threatened. Next, we have social isolation. How many people today live locked in their own emotional bubbles, not for pleasure in solitude, but out of fear of getting hurt? They cut ties, avoid intimacy, build an invisible dome where they believe they are safe. But deep down, they are only reinforcing the message that the world is too dangerous and they are too fragile to handle it. And what about paralyzing perfectionism? This is one of the cruelest false armors. The person lives trying to do everything impeccably right, because deep down they believe that any failure is a confirmation that they are not good enough. This is not excellence. It is self-sabotage disguised as effort. It is the fear of being seen making mistakes. It is the ego saying, if I never fail, maybe no one will discover that I don't feel enough. Finally, there is preemptive aggression, the need to attack before being attacked. People who react with hostility to any criticism, who become sarcastic, harsh, or even cruel as a way to show strength. But this strength is what Jung would call neurotic compensation, a desperate attempt to protect an ego that can no longer bear to be exposed. All these false armors have something in common. They push people away, and by pushing others away, you also distance yourself from yourself, because the ego, contrary to what many think, is not the enemy. It is the bridge between the internal and external world. If that bridge is crumbling, your reality becomes unstable, chaotic, and unbearable. Jung made it clear, true psychological armor is not built with fear. It arises from the differentiation between the ego and the self, between who you are and who you are trying to appear to be in order not to get hurt. And if all that you have built so far is not armor, then what is it? This is where we enter the next stage. To build an authentic defense, you first need to lay the right foundation. And Jung said that this foundation begins with an internal movement, creating an observer within you, someone who sees without getting confused, who feels but is not swept away by emotions. In the next part, you will discover the first real step to building armor that does not break. Let's continue. Most people believe they are their emotions. That being overwhelmed by sadness, anger, or shame means being sad, being angry, being unworthy. But this is a dangerous illusion, and perhaps the greatest trap for those trying to strengthen themselves psychologically without understanding what Jung truly taught. Carl Jung proposed that the first step to developing a healthy and resilient ego is to create an internal instance he called the observer. A part of you that does not react, does not judge, does not collapse. It simply observes. And it is this capacity for separation between what you feel and who you are that begins to form the foundation of true psychological armor. What does this mean in practice? It means that when you are criticized, instead of immediately diving into the automatic thought, "I am a failure," you start to recognize, there is a part of me that is feeling shame right now. Notice the difference. In the first case, your entire identity is swallowed by an emotion. In the second, there is distance, space, clarity. This shift in internal language is not superficial, it is revolutionary. When you begin to name your experiences instead of identifying with them, you start to break free from the cycle of emotional collapse that defines a fragile ego. Jung saw the observing ego as the bridge between consciousness and the unconscious. When you activate this observer, you become capable of looking inward with honesty, without judgment. You can perceive yourself as angry but not act impulsively. You can perceive yourself as insecure but still stand your ground. You can perceive yourself as vulnerable but move forward resolutely. And that is the essence of armor. You do not stop feeling. You learn to contain without repressing. But this ability does not arise spontaneously. It needs to be practiced. Jung believed that the process of individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are, begins with strengthening this internal instance. It is what allows the ego not to be swept away by the primitive forces of the unconscious, that it remains centered even when everything around is collapsing. People with a permeable ego live at the mercy of any emotional wind. But when the observing ego awakens, you begin to build the firm foundation of the inner citadel. You stop reacting automatically and start responding with awareness. And it is at this very moment that your armor begins to take real shape. But here is the next challenge. Even with this internal observer awakened, you will still be vulnerable if you continue to wage war against parts of yourself that you do not accept. Your next step is to confront what you fear most about yourself, your shadow, the parts you have rejected, hidden, or projected onto others. In the next part, we will go deeper. You will learn how to integrate the shadow that still destroys you from within, and why only when you accept your wholeness will external criticisms and judgments cease to dominate you. Let's continue. You cannot build a true armor while at war with parts of yourself. This is one of the hardest and most liberating truths that Carl Jung taught us. As long as you reject the darker aspects of your psyche, you will remain vulnerable, because everything you hide within yourself will continue to control you from the shadows. The shadow, in Jungian thought, is everything you do not want to be, everything you have learned to deny, to repress, to hide. anger, envy, selfishness, fragility, ambition, lust, laziness, arrogance, fear. Everything you deemed unacceptable because someone taught you it was not pretty, appropriate, or kind has been pushed into a psychological basement where you hoped it would die. But it did not die. It is there, watching you, and slipping out through the cracks when you least expect it, in an outburst of anger that you say was nothing, in a subtle sabotage that prevents you from completing a project, in an envy you camouflage as moral criticism. The shadow does not disappear. It infiltrates everything you try to control without integrating. Jung said that what you hate most in others often reveals what you do not accept in yourself. This is projection. You see in others what you do not want to see in yourself. And as long as you continue to think the problem is the other, you will never free yourself from the pain being generated within you. That is why integrating the shadow is so essential to developing a real psychological armor. Because a criticism only destroys you when it touches a point of your shadow that you have not yet recognized. An insult only brings you down when there is a part of you that still believes it is true, and that part has been exiled, hidden, denied. Want a direct exercise? Make a list of the words that hurt you the most when used against you. Selfish, weak, arrogant, stupid, lazy. Then, with brutal honesty, find situations where you acted that way, not to punish yourself, but to accept that you are human, that these parts exist, and that it is not because they exist that you are less. It is because you hide them that you suffer. When you integrate the shadow, you become whole. When someone accuses you of something you have already recognized in yourself, it does not destroy you. It merely informs you. Pain gives way to reflection. Reactivity gives way to clarity. And it is at this point that the armor begins to become real, because you no longer need to pretend to be perfect to be worthy. You are whole, with light and shadow. But the shadow is just one of the layers of inner work. There is another level, even deeper, that needs to be built to consolidate your strength. An unshakable internal foundation. Something that neither the opinions of others nor your own doubt can shake. A solid core of identity. In the next part, we will build this base, your inner citadel. A mental place where your most fundamental truths live, protected, immutable, resistant to external chaos. Let's move on. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Every real armor needs a core, and that core is not made of appearance nor of external approval. It is made of deep convictions about who you are. Those truths that remain even when everything outside crumbles. Jung understood this as the need for an ego that has a center. A self capable of sustaining its integrity without depending on the reflection the world gives back. The problem is that many people build their identity based on others' opinions. And when those opinions fluctuate, as they always do, the identity collapses along with it. And the result is that old pattern. You feel good when you receive compliments and devastated at the slightest sign of criticism. This is not emotional stability. This is psychic dependency. The inner citadel is the opposite of that. It is the space where you gather and protect the most fundamental truths about yourself. We are not talking about motivational phrases or egoic idealizations. We are talking about realities observed with radical honesty. I am a person who honors what I promise. I remain calm under pressure. I make mistakes, but I always return to center. This is the raw material of true armor, internal evidence. The exercise here is straightforward, but deep. List 5 to 7 non-negotiable truths about yourself. Things you have lived, that you have upheld in difficult moments, that you have proven to yourself. When the world tells you that you are nothing, you will look at this list and remember, I know who I am, and no one can take that away. Jung emphasized that without this foundation, the ego cannot withstand the process of individuation. It collapses under pressure or becomes rigid and false. The citadel is what allows the ego to remain flexible, yet firm, open to feedback, but not dominated by it, willing to grow, but without selling out to please. And here is the key point. Even with this foundation built, the enemy can still arise. Not out there, but within your own mind. Internal voices that repeat old criticisms, that knew exactly where to press to dismantle you. Jung knew that these voices are not you, but they have power over you until you look at them with courage. In the next part, we will do exactly that. We will descend into the territory of the inner critic and learn how to dialogue with it instead of being dragged by its lies. It is time to master the most intimate battlefield, your own mind. There is a voice inside you that knows exactly where to strike. It knows your fears, your insecurities, your weaknesses. It calls you incapable at the exact moment you try to move forward. It calls you ridiculous when you dare to express yourself. It calls you weak when you feel pain. This voice is so intimate, so familiar, that you believe it is you, but it is not. Jung discovered that much of human suffering arises from this unconscious fusion with the inner critic, a psychic entity formed by echoes of the past, harsh parents, humiliating teachers, emotional abuse, constant comparisons, unintegrated rejections. This voice does not speak the truth. It speaks fear, memory, trauma, conditioning, and as long as you just listen, without questioning, it governs your life on autopilot. For Jung, the most powerful method to disarm this force was what he called active imagination, a conscious dialogue with the inner voices, not to silence them, as many try to do, but to understand them. Because everything you try to silence becomes stronger. Everything you try to exclude grows in the dark. But everything you face with presence loses its power to destroy you. This process begins with a simple yet profoundly unsettling question. Who is speaking inside me right now? When the avalanche of self-criticism arises, you are not good enough. You will never succeed. You will embarrass yourself. Instead of accepting these phrases as reality, make the Jungian move. Personify this voice. Observe it. Give it form. Ask, where did you come from? What are you trying to protect me from? Why do you show up every time I try to do something new? This type of questioning dismantles the illusion that the inner critic is your conscience. It is not. It is an old part, frozen in time, that still tries to protect you with strategies that may have worked when you were 5 years old, but now only sabotage you. When you create this conscious dialogue, something extraordinary happens. The voice loses its tone of absolute authority. It hesitates. It responds. And you realize sometimes for the first time in your life that it is not an enemy, but a part of you that never matured. A part that still thinks you are in danger when all you are trying to do is live. And it is here that your psychological armor begins to truly solidify. Because when you learn to listen to the inner critic without obeying it, you stop being dragged by it. You become the center, the adult, the self, the strengthened consciousness that Jung emphasized as the pillar of the individuation process. But there is still an essential element missing, a skill that Jung considered the pinnacle of psychic resilience, the ability to hold two opposites at the same time without collapsing, to recognize that a criticism may have something useful without allowing it to define your worth. This is the next step, and without it, your armor is not complete. Before we move on, leave your comment below. What phrase from your inner critic hits you the hardest today? Writing and reflecting on this is already the beginning of the individuation process. And continue to the next video. It is a key piece to complete this journey and consolidate everything you are building now. We have come this far together. Now it is time to go even deeper. I'll see you there.